Welcome to my channel. My name is Adina. I'm an intuitive astrologer. In this video slash presentation, we will be going over the full moon we're having in Libra, April 1st, 2026. For the first portion of this video, I will go over the chart for the full moon. And then for the second portion, I will get into all 12 rising signs. And I will have timestamps listed down below so that you can skip ahead if you choose. Although I highly recommend watching the first portion of this video because it will bring more context to the energies once you get into your rising sign. All right. Now, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you align with my energy and enjoy my content. Let's get right into it. Okay. So, the full moon that we're having in Libra is April 1st, 2026. Now, for whoever watches my lunation videos, I always, when we're talking about the full moon, I always go back and kind of discuss the new moon because a full moon is a culmination period from the last 6 months. What has taken place the last 6 months. So I go back, I take notes on the new moon. And when I went back, the last new moon we had in Libra was October 21st, 2025. That new moon was at 28 degrees Libra. There's something interesting. Venus was also in Libra. Venus is the ruler of Libra. So at that new moon, Venus was in Libra. And what I felt very strongly intuitively was that over the last 6 months, there's been major developments around trauma healing, emotional growth. That new moon was, there was a Jupiter square to Chiron in that new moon chart. There was also there was a Mercury conjunction to Mars. And so the first thing I felt looking at that chart was over the last 6 months, there would have been a lot of triggers. And this is a culmination point. So I want you to think back the last 6 months. What have you been moving through? The question I wrote down is, what have you overcome over the last 6 months? Because that's what I was feeling so powerfully. What have you overcome the last 6 months? And it's in Libra. So that new moon, Venus was in Libra. That can show there was a lot of triggers around relationships and one-on-one connections where other people were triggering your growth. So certain connections in your life were triggering growth through hurt, through trauma, through whatever the case is. We have these karmic connections that come into our life, and sometimes we experience lessons and not necessarily they're not there for what's that saying? They're there for a reason, season, or something. You guys will know what I'm talking about. There's actually a really cool saying. Some people come into your life for a reason, for a season, and then there's another one, I can't remember it. But that's been the last 6 months. And so if we look at this chart, this full moon is at 12 degrees of Libra. Venus is in another home sign of Taurus. So the last new moon, she was in Venus, or she was in Libra. And Venus is now in Taurus. Well, Taurus represents stability, security, tangible growth. And so now, also, too, we don't have Jupiter squaring Chiron like we did in the new moon. We've got this final trine between Mercury and Jupiter, which is this trine energy we've been in for over a month now. Since February, we've had Mercury retrograde, right? Mercury stationed retrograde the end of February, but Mercury formed three different trines to Jupiter. And if you've been watching my content, I've been talking a lot about this. Pay attention to those specific dates because there's a story playing out. Well, this is just a few days before the exact trine. And so there's something clicking here. This is a water trine. This is emotional. This is spiritual. And so some of the things that came to me intuitively was developing a new perspective. There's a mindset shift around emotional trauma and energetic awareness. And so something's been triggered. What I felt is through pain, through trauma, whether it's from what somebody else has done to you, that Libra energy, right? Those relationships. There's growth developing. And this is the culmination point. We're finally at that threshold of understanding. Like, I believe that things happen in our life to trigger growth, to trigger, we also have life lessons. Like we have my personal belief, and I don't know if you subscribe to this, is that there's certain things we want to learn in this lifetime. And we can go through horrific experiences, but we chose to actually go through those experiences so that we can grow. And I know that sometimes saying that can be triggering for some people. And trust me, I've been through some, really painful stuff too. But I know like that it's made me the person I am today. And I feel like there's a lot of us that are developing that understanding just based on the astrology, this energy. Like that was the biggest thing that kind of popped out to me. Another thing I wrote down too is how you take care of your energy, like becoming more energetically aware through trauma and hurt. There's a big emphasis on relationships. These are all the notes I wrote down, which I kind of already mentioned. It's almost like becoming more aware of your energy, your heart in the situation. It's almost like taking responsibility for your energy the best you can. And also too with Venus in Taurus, I've also felt too like there's more emotional stability that's going to be developing now. But this is a closing period. That new moon, and one of the big things too was that new moon was at 28 degrees. So now it was like the first thing that came to me is something is finalizing, something was closing the last 6 months through relationship trauma, hurt, relationship dynamics. There's a new perspective being developed. There's a mindset shift, approaching something from a different standpoint. And I have felt this for a couple months now because I've been talking about this for a while, like just feeling like there's this like big internal shift taking place where we will be approaching certain situations in our life from a different emotional standpoint, different energetic standpoint, new perspective. It's like we have a new look on something. We are approaching something in a very different way, and it very well can be the relationships in your life. And once we get into all 12 rising signs, it'll be a lot. We'll see how this energy is showing up for each rising sign, and we'll get a better idea too of the areas of life activated by the full moon and the last new moon, and where the internal growth and wisdom has taken place. But Libra in general can mean relationships, justice, so legal issues, documents, paperwork, like stuff like that. That's all Libra energy. Where things have not been fair in your life, like if there is a certain situation that's been very unjust or unfair. Now, with Venus here in Taurus, I personally think, and look, Venus is at the early degrees of Taurus, at that 2 degrees. There's like new stability being developed, new internal security stability. It's like taking responsibility for your own energy, taking responsibility for your own emotions, deciding, like, I am no longer going to allow this person to bring me down. I'm going to protect myself energetically. I'm going to take care of my emotions. I'm not allowing that person to have that type of power over how I feel on a day to day basis. I hope this makes sense. But I feel like a lot of us are really, developing this awareness, which is a good thing. This is a really good thing. The last couple of months, with a lot of activations to that North Node in Pisces, we've been in a lot of karmic energy, but it's pushing us towards this new direction that we're all meant to move into because it's that North Node. But we had all of the personal planets forming conjunction to that North Node at 8 degrees. So there was major activations and triggers taking place, pushing us into a new path of personal evolution so we can grow into this new being that we are kind of transcending into. And I know that sounds kind of like woo-woo, like transcending into, but it's all a part of our personal evolution. Well, I hope this makes sense because this was the biggest thing I felt with this full moon, like so powerfully too. And I've been working on my own energy. I don't know if you guys have listened to my podcast, The Dina's Diary. It's on my channel if you want to check it out. I talk about my own personal story because 2025 was a really difficult year for me. So I've also been going through my own personal journey and healing. And so I'm feeling all of this too, and also navigating it. But it's almost like I know I'm not the only one going through it. It's weird. It's hard to explain. And so yeah, when I connected to it intuitively, it was the biggest thing I felt with this whole lunation cycle in Libra. Oh, I also want to mention the Venus square to Pluto because this is what I feel from this. Pluto being an Aquarius, we want to remember that Aquarius is the people, the collective, others. And no matter what growth, no matter what wisdom, no matter what new direction you're moving into, it's going to feel different. It's going to be different than the status quo, than the, societal norms. And don't allow that to stop you. Don't allow that to prevent you from your personal evolutionary journey, from growing on an astronomical level, because we are in that energy and it's going to happen fast. I've been talking a lot about in my videos this year about growth is coming, changes are coming very quick, very fast, and they're going to be even more quicker, more faster once Uranus enters Gemini. So we don't um don't shut down the ability, or don't be scared to you know, try new things out that can seem a little bit different, that are maybe something that you're not used to because you're scared of what other people are going to think. You know, I hope this is resonating. Because that could be, a little bit of a trigger with that. And I only say that because Pluto is in Aquarius, Venus is in Taurus. So yeah, and I'll get a little bit deeper into that once we get into all 12 rising signs as well. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope this aligns with you. I hope this resonates with you. If it does, hit subscribe, like this video. And now let's get into all 12 rising signs. Aries, you have this full moon in Libra happening in your seventh house of relationships and one-on-one connections. So I want you to think back to October 21st. 2025, that is when we had our new moon in Libra. What type of evolution or change has taken place when it comes to you and your partnerships, you and your relationships? Has a relationship developed? Do you have a different perspective on relationships and your connections to other people? There is something growing, or something that has grown in some way or another, some aspect of how you connect within partnership that's developed over the last 6 months. When we had that new moon in Libra, Venus was in Libra, and now Venus is in Taurus. And Venus, and you have Taurus in your second house of money, finances, material possessions, but also stability, security, your values, what you need to feel safe, secure. So there's something growing, I feel like, too, on an internal level, because that new moon as well there was Jupiter square Chiron. So it shows there could have been hurt, or there could have been trauma that was surfaced around relationships that really did trigger some growth. This is a culmination point of that. This is where you can develop a different perspective on something that has to do with some relationship in your life or relationship dynamic. So I really love this for you, Aries. And with this full moon's lighting up your seventh house of relationships. And so this can bring in new partnerships or new partnership dynamics. And then Venus being the ruler, lighting up and activating that second house. There's also going to be some activations around money, around finances, around material possessions, what you need to feel safe, secure, and what you need on a comfort level as well. Taurus, you have this full moon in Libra in your sixth house of work, health, and daily routine. So, this full moon is lighting up your health house, your house of pets, your house of your daily duties at work, at home, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis at work and at home. The sixth house also is associated with employees and coworkers. So, all of those themes and topics can be activated, but I also want you to think back to October 21st when we had the new moon in Libra. Over the last 6 months, what has developed here? This is a culmination period. So, what has changed around your health over the last 6 months? Or what has changed around coworkers, around employees, around pets, or how you approach your health, your daily health habits. Have you changed what you're eating, working out, doing yoga? That is what this full moon can be activating more of or triggering. Now, Venus is the ruler of Libra currently in your first house. And so there is going to be an activation where you are feeling this very powerful pull towards making changes with your health or changes around pets, coworkers, employees, those themes and topics that are associated with the sixth house. This is where you can finally decide, okay, I'm ready to get serious about my health. Maybe you've been struggling with something over the last 6 months and now it's go time. Now you're really feeling that pull to start taking things seriously. Gemini, you have this full moon in your fifth house of children, creativity, passion, romance, hobbies, interests. Everything that lights you up and everything you do for fun is in that fifth house. So those themes and topics are all being activated at the time of this full moon, which is April 1st. I want you to think back to October 21st, 2025. That's when we had our new moon in Libra. What we want to look at full moons as culmination points. And so, what have you been navigating over the last 6 months around your children, around creative projects, around hobbies, what you're interested in, what you do for fun, sports, entertainment, all that type of stuff? What's been going on in those areas of life where now you can be having a different perspective on something, or now there's a different understanding? There is something new coming in here where it's almost like a better understanding of something you've been navigating the last 6 months. Maybe there was, I know in that new moon chart, we at that time we had Jupiter squaring Chiron, which could have shown over the last 6 months, a lot of triggers around healing, trauma, stuff like that. And it could have been around children because it's in your fifth house. We also had Venus in Libra, at the time of that at that new moon. Now we have Venus in Taurus, which is another Venus ruled sign. But Venus being in Taurus in your 12th house of things, people, places that are hidden, the subconscious, there can be something also triggered with what you're working on or doing behind the scenes. There could be something triggered or activated that you're having to navigate that maybe not a lot of people know about, or you could be working on a creative project behind the scenes that not a lot of people know about that you've been maybe even working on or starting to develop over the last 6 months. And now it's like there's a push to move forward with it. Now you're going to feel this sudden pull to kind of get things moving in this area of life. Or again, it could have to do with children. There could be something going on with your children kind of behind the scenes that not a lot of people know about. Or if you work in a hospital too, or work with a children's hospital. I don't know why I just felt that something. Yeah, that's odd. I just felt something around a children's hospital too, just because of the kind of coinciding energies with Venus and the 12th. I'm sure for some of you that is going to be a thing. If you do something with like children's hospitals or sick kids or something along those lines, there could be something going on there. But this is a period. What we do want to be careful of, though, is the Venus square to Pluto. Pluto being an Aquarius that rules, other people. Aquarius being in your ninth house of long distance travel. If there's something going on overseas or something going on like out of your country or farther away from where you live, there could just be some sticky dynamics there that you just want to be a little bit careful of. But all in all, Gemini, this is a full moon that is a culmination period of whatever you've been navigating in the last 6 months around your creative ventures, around children in your life that are very important to you, around what you're doing on a day-to-day basis that lights you up, that you have joy in. There's a new perspective here. There's new growth here. Internally, you are having a different approach to something and beginning something new. Cancer, you have this full moon in Libra in your fourth house of home, family, property, real estate, your roots. And so those themes and topics are all being activated at the time of this full moon. I want you to think back to October 21st. That's when we had the new moon in Libra. What have you been navigating around your home and family? And family dynamics, and even stuff going on around the house, like maybe having to fix something over the last 6 months. This is a culmination point. Something's finalizing here. Something is finally completing that you've been moving through and navigating over the last 6 months when it has to do with your home, your family, family members, parents, the actual house itself, possibly moving. Actually, for some of you, if you were deciding to grow your family 6 months ago, now is when it finally can possibly take place and actually happen. There could be like your family growing too at this point, especially too with Jupiter in your first house. Venus, the ruler, is also in your 11th house in Taurus, your 11th house of friendships and social circles, online connections. So there could also be an activation with friends or friendships, like maybe friends having to move in, or maybe doing something with friends around your house, or there's like a connection with maybe having friends over in your house. Maybe there's a party you've been planning the last 6 months, and now is when it's finally happening. It's finally taking place, and you're getting together with your friends and your family. I'm sure for some of you, it's definitely going to be a thing. But all in all, Cancer, this full moon's activating home and family. And think back to the last 6 months, what you've been navigating. What have you been moving through, especially for you too, because Jupiter's in your first house, and there could be something really deep as well for some of you that you've been navigating around trauma and family that now it's like you're approaching, you have a different perspective, or there's something that is shift on an emotional and energetic level. And it's there's a release taking place. Like it's almost like you're saying not that you're okay with it, but you're saying I'm no longer going to allow this person to have this type of effect on me, to affect me in this way, to affect my emotional well-being in this way. And I think it's an amazing thing, to be honest. It's a lot of emotional maturity that's taking place for you, Cancer. Leo, you have this full moon in Libra happening in your third house of community, neighbors, neighborhood, your local travel vehicles, siblings, cousins, self expression, your mindset. Now, I want you to think back to October 21st. That's when we had the new moon in Libra. Something was Something's been finalizing the last 6 months in this area of life. That new moon was at 28 degrees, indicating that there was a closing out of something, whether it's with a neighbor, whether it's with something that you're doing within your community, or it could have to do with a mindset shift. Something is shifting where now you have a different perspective on something. This could have to do with a vehicle or a sibling, even. There could be trauma around a sibling as well, because that new moon, there was a square between Jupiter and Chiron. And now we've got this final trine between Mercury and Jupiter, which can show that there's a finalizing and a completion on a very emotional, energetic, and spiritual level. I hope that makes sense. It's almost like you feel it's the best way to describe this. It's almost like you decide, I'm no longer allowing this person to affect me emotionally. I'm choosing to have complete and utter control over my emotional well being. And I'm not going to let my sibling or my cousin or my extended family or my neighbor or whoever affect me in this way. And I'm sure for some of you it'll align, for some of you, you'll be like, what are you talking about? This can also have to do with your mindset or something that you've been working on around reading, speaking, and writing over the last 6 months. Full moons are a culmination period. So, something you've been working on or focusing on in this area of life, these themes and topics, this is where there's big developments taking place in this area of life. Now, the ruler is Venus, which is up here in your 10th house of career and public reputation. So, also, too, whatever you've been working on down here in the third house, now you're finally putting it out there for the world to see in the 10th house, where your public image is changing. This can have to do with your career or career moves, business. So, Leo, this could be I think this is really good for you, this full moon. I think this is activating new potentials around career, new potentials around business, new potentials around growth emotionally, intuitively, because of the other coinciding energies. And if you're a Leo, where you've been having certain dynamics with family members, siblings, or neighbors, I think you'll finally notice there's a closing out of any difficulties that's been taking place in those areas of life. Virgo, you have this full moon in Libra happening in your second house of money, finances, material possessions, personal values, what you need to feel safe and secure. That is all in your second house. Now, I want you to think back to October 21st. That's when we had the new moon in Libra. So, over the last 6 months, what changes have taken place around your finances, around your approach to money, your relationship to money, your relationship to your material possessions, or what you need to feel safe, what you need to feel secure? Do you have a different look or a different perspective on your material wealth? That is all being activated with this full moon in Libra because it's in that second house. Libra is ruled by Venus. Now, at the time of that new moon, Venus was in Libra, and that new moon was at 28 degrees, which showed me that there was something closing out. So, over the last 6 months, there would have been something completing or closing out when it has to do what you need to feel safe, what you need to feel secure, what you used to need to require yourself to be in a stable, secure environment or place. And now that's changing. Like maybe now you don't need, certain things in your life for comfort or certain things in your life for security. Maybe that's changing in some way. Now Venus is up there in the ninth house. So there's different views, there's different beliefs developing here with Venus in the ninth house. So I would love to hear in the comments below how this has shown up for you. But I think there's new beliefs developing around what you now need to feel safe, secure, what you require to I'm trying to put words into. It's like, how some people, what's the best way to describe this? Um, where you require certain things in your life to feel for security, you know what I mean? And comfort, where maybe now there are certain things changing. It's like, you know what? I no longer really need that to in my life to be, as a level of security or so for example, I'm Virgo rising. So here's an example for you because I'm not really explaining it properly. One thing last year was a huge year for me. And so one thing that has changed for me, and maybe this will align with you in your own way, is I now look at certain things. There's certain things that happened in my life where I had no choice but to let go and surrender. And um, have a different perspective and approach to what makes me feel safe and secure because I dealt with a lot of stalking. I dealt with a lot of I wasn't in control over certain areas of my life and I really had to surrender where I decided, you know what? I may not be able to control this part that's happening, but I can control how I feel about it. I can control how I react and I can control how I respond to it. And that's kind of what I feel like's taking place in its own way, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be on a safety level. It could be on a monetary level. Like maybe you once always needed to have $10,000 in the bank to feel secure, where, with the price of things and groceries and our gas and, everything else, it's very hard to have, a certain amount for the average person. And so maybe you're like, you know what? As long as I have enough for this and this and this, I don't need extras. Maybe it's like now you're getting to a place, I don't need the extra luxurious things. As long as I have the basic necessities, I'm good. That's one way this can show up. And I know this is a bit of a long, drawn out lunation forecast for you, Virgo, but I didn't know how else to kind of explain it. I wasn't able to find the proper words. Now, Venus, and again, Venus being in that ninth house, it's changing your beliefs around money, your beliefs around what you need to feel safe, secure, and what you require, And so, yeah, let me know in the comments below if that even aligns with you. But I feel like, in that new moon chart, there was a square between Jupiter and Chiron, which can also show that there may have been some triggers and just a few days before this lunation, actually, we're going to have a Venus conjunction Chiron. So there can also be a trigger again around money and finances and shared resources and um, trauma, it's that eighth house, right? And so there can be where there's certain triggers and there's almost like a release taking place, a letting go, like I am no longer allowing this to affect me in this way, or I no longer need this to feel this type of way. You know what I mean? Like something along those lines, and apply it to your life however, you know, you think it aligns and resonates. Libra, this is your full moon, so happy full moon. I want you to think back to October 21st because that's when we had the new moon in Libra. What have you gone through when it has to do with you, your life direction, your life purpose, this new path that you're moving into? Also, you and your partnerships, you and your relationships, you and all your one on one connections. What has changed over the last 6 months? There's new growth developing. Like maybe the people pleasing has stopped. Maybe you are starting to stand firm in your boundaries. Maybe you've been developing some really strong boundaries. Like maybe Saturn moving into the seventh house is showing you, like, you know what? You need to develop some really strong boundaries here and not be afraid on if others are going to leave your life. Those who are meant to stay will stay, and those who are not will fall away. But think back, what have you been navigating the last 6 months around you and how you connect with in partnerships? That's all going to be highlighted at the time of this full moon. Venus is your ruler and the ruler of this full moon in Taurus, which is in your eighth house of shared resources and intimacy, the intimacy that you have within your relationships. Also, your partner's finances, shared resources, loans, debt, taxes, inheritance, all the money coming in from outside resources is in that eighth house. And also deep psychological healing and transformation. And so those themes and topics can also be activated at the time of this full moon as well. And there can also be this like realization of growth that's taking place in these areas of life. Scorpio, you have this full moon in Libra in your 12th house of people, things, places that are hidden, the subconscious, your dreams, what's going on behind the scenes. Well, now think back to October 21st. What began for you? Because that's when we had the new moon in Libra. So, over the last 6 months, what has taken place around your spiritual practices, around what's going on behind the scenes? Back then Venus was in the 12th house at the time of that new moon. So there could have been a lot that you were navigating behind the scenes that you've been that there can honestly be a lot that you've been dealing with behind the scenes that not a lot of people know about the last 6 months. So now is when a lot of that, this is a completion, this is a culmination, this is a finalizing this full moon. So think, what's been going on, whatever you've been navigating behind the scenes that not a lot of people know, now is when there's a different perspective developed. There's growth here. There's something finalizing. There's something completing. There's something ending. Now we have Venus and Taurus, which is in your seventh house of relationships. So whatever you've been navigating behind the scenes, there can now be an activation within a partnership. So I don't know if whether a partner finds out or you tell a partner, or maybe it's been a relationship that's been going on behind the scenes, and now you're bringing that relationship out in the open um, for other people to know about. So I'm sure for some of you that could be a thing. But yeah, this is going to be a completion. There's something kind of closing out here, whether it is um like a leveling up in a partnership, like a current partnership, or one that you were kind of that not a lot of people knew about, but that now is coming out in the open. That's kind of what's being activated with this full moon, Scorpio. Sagittarius, you have this full moon in Libra in your 11th house of social circles, friendships, your hopes, your dreams. All the groups and associations you're connected to are also in that 11th house. And so that area of life is being lit up. Back in October 21st, we had the new moon in Libra. So think back, what have you been navigating the last 6 months around your friendships, around your social circles, around certain groups and associations you're connected to? There's a completion taking place here. There's a finalizing. There's something culminating here with this full moon. Over the last 6 months, there's been certain things that have taken place around friendships, around social groups, around different groups that you're connected to, where maybe you're feeling like you're no longer in alignment, or it's almost like a new perspective has developed, and there's now changes that are going to be made. So whether you leave one group and go to another, whether you begin your own group with something, or whether you are finished within a friendship, there can be certain friends that maybe over the last 6 months, there's been a lot that's kind of surfaced, and now you're just kind of done with it, done with the friendship. Venus is in your sixth house of work, health, and daily routine. So that area of life is also going to be activated. So there could be something kind of activated in this area of life that is then causing you to that is now bringing your focus to like maybe your health, maybe your pets, maybe coworkers, employees, your day-to-day routine at work, your day-to-day routine at home. Like maybe you're deciding to work with a friend. Maybe you're developing something online, kind of working that's really going to shift your daily routine up in some way. Either way, there's something being activated around what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and your health and even pets and all those six house topics. And I mean, really, it can show up in so many ways. So it's hard to kind of say every way this can manifest, but and your friendships and what you're kind of doing online or within social groups or, hopes and dreams and, this 11th house. There's something being activated in the 11th house that is then going to push your focus to the sixth house, if that makes sense. Capricorn, you have this full moon in Libra lighting up your 10th house of career, business, your public reputation. So think back to October 21st when we had the new moon in Libra. What were you beginning? What were you starting back around your career, around maybe a new business venture? Now is a culmination period. This is a finalizing. This is where there's a completion taking place, something you've been navigating around your career, business, your work, your job, the last 6 months. Something is completing here with this full moon. Now, Venus is the ruler of Libra, and Venus is currently in your fifth house of children and creativity and passion, romance, hobbies, interests. Everything you do for fun and everything that lights you up is in that fifth house. So there's something that you can be bringing maybe from the fifth house into the 10th or vice versa. There could be an activation of the 10th house of career, um, but there's something you're now doing around your career or your job that you enjoy, that you love, that maybe even a creative project that now you're making a business out of it, something along those lines. There's something about merging the fifth house and the 10th house together that's being activated with this full moon. Aquarius, you have this full moon in Libra in your ninth house of higher education, higher knowledge, long distance travel, philosophy, your belief systems, astrology, religion is in the ninth house. Think back to October 21st. What have you been navigating around those themes and topics the last 6 months? This is a culmination point. There's a completion taking place here. So maybe your belief systems have changed. Maybe back in October, something took place and it changed your religious beliefs or it changed your philosophical beliefs or just your beliefs in general. Maybe you decided to travel the world and now you're done. you know, this is where something is completing here because a full moon is a culmination point. Maybe you decided to go back to school and now is like another semester or another kind of step to that course. You know what I mean? This can also show up like maybe you're publishing something. Maybe you've been creating something over the last 6 months and now you're finally ready to put that out in the open, to publish that. Maybe you're teaching something. Um, Maybe you've been working on a course, that you want to sell, something along those lines. Venus is the ruler of Libra, and Venus is going to be in your fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate at this time. And so there is something also being activated in your fourth house around home, family, property, real estate, family members, maybe something actually within the home. I actually love when Venus is transiting the fourth house because I always tend to like redecorate or do something different with my home. And I don't redecorate, like I don't paint my house every year when Venus enters my fourth house, but I do like change it up a little bit, whether it's I just spend a little bit more time and focus on decorations and like fixing things up when Venus is in the fourth, but I love Venus in the fourth house. And you have Taurus in the fourth, so I'm sure your house probably already looks like that. But there's something also being activated here. So I don't know if there's a merging of the fourth and the ninth, like maybe something that you were doing in the ninth is now coming the fourth or vice versa. There could be, um, I mean, if you decide to travel or if you decide to go overseas, that affects your home. You then have to like figure out who's going to come watch my house, something along those lines, but it doesn't have to manifest in that way. I hope this is making sense, but something that you are something that's being activated in the ninth can then, um, also be triggered in the fourth, in a sense. Pisces, you have this full moon in Libra in your eighth house of shared resources, your partner's finances, loans, debt, taxes, inheritance, psychological healing and transformation, intimacy. Those themes and topics are all in the eighth house. I want you to think back to October 21st because that's when we had the new moon in Libra. So, what have you been navigating in this area of life over the last 6 months? This is a culmination point. This is a completion. There's something finalizing here around your money, around shared resources, around your partner's finances, around intimate connections, something around maybe intimacy with somebody. It could be, I would say it really has to do with like shared resources, maybe loans, debts, like finally being able to close something out. Maybe if you've been also too on some psychological healing journey, there can be new developments at this time, but there is a culmination point. There is something closing out here and activated. And then Venus is the ruler of Libra, and Venus is going to be in your third house of self-expression, your mindset, communication, reading, speaking, also your local community, your neighborhood, your siblings, your cousins, your vehicles. So, one way this could actually manifest is like if you were planning on doing something with a car, maybe you need to get money for a car, or this could literally have to do with a vehicle because the ruler of the eighth is going to be in the third, which can then activate the house of vehicles. So, there could be something activated around a vehicle here. Maybe you're having to spend money on a vehicle. Maybe you're having to get a loan for a vehicle. Maybe you're finally paying off your loan for your vehicle. There could be, a completion of debt, a completion of something, but there's something kind of merging with that third house and that eighth house.